Everything began when Japan started invading Manchuria in 1931, followed by the rest of China in 1937 and Indochina in 1940. As European and American were very suspicious, they imposed a total embargo on the sale of oil to Japan. And there was influence of Japanese thought to take military action to win the raw material in Asia. Besides, by 1941, the Japanese had been engaged for 4 years in trying to subjugate China. As long as they were heavily reliant on imported materials for their military forces, particularly oil from the United States, from 1940 to 1941, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Netherlands imposed embargoes on supplying oil and war materials to Japan. The objective of the embargoes was to assist the Chinese and encourage the Japanese to halt military action in China. The Japanese considered that pulling out of China would result in a loss of face and decided instead to take military action against US, British, and Dutch territories in Southeast Asia. The Japanese forces for the invasion were assembled in 1941 on Hainan Island and in French Indochina. The troop buildup in Indochina and Hainan was noticed by the Allies, and when asked, the Japanese advised that it related to its operations in China. Since British and Holland involved in fighting against Hitler in World War II, British disabled to protect their territories in SEA. Japanese action started in the attack on Pearl Harbor, 7 December 1941. Japanese launched an air attack on the American base. Japanese attack on Malaya was launched simultaneously with that on Pearl Harbor.
The occupation commenced with Imperial Japanese Army landings at Padang, Pak Amat Beach, Kota Baru just after midnight on 8 December 1941, triggering a ferocious battle with the British Indian Army an hour before the attack on Pearl Harbor. This battle marked the official start of the Pacific War and the start of the Japanese occupation of Malaya. Kota Baru Airport was occupied in the morning. Sungai Petani, Butterworth, and Alor airports were captured on 9 December 1941. Japanese soldiers landing at Kota Baru divided into two separate forces, with one moving down the east coast towards Kuantan and the other southwards towards the Perak River. On 11 December 1941, the Japanese started bombing Penang. Jitra and the Alor fell into Japanese hands on 12 December 1941. The British had a retreat to the south. On 16 December 1941, the British left Penang to the Japanese, who occupied it on 19 December. The Japanese continued to advance more southwards. As 31 January 1942 approached, the whole of Malaya had fallen into Japanese hands.
Within 10 weeks of the whole peninsula and Singapore had been captured, attacks from Singapore, Cape Baru, and Patanai, attacked from landward side and not from sea. Once landed, forced Thai to sign a treaty where Thai could not attack the Japanese from rear, sinking of two battleships, Prince of Wales and Repulse. Japanese tactics and preparation. Japanese military skills were mastered of jungle warfare and strategies adopted by Japanese to attack from land. Japanese moral, they were most dedicated and courageous. Even with their number half the British, but they won the war. Japanese propaganda, Asia for Asia. Unprepared British. British other commitments, they were against Hitler in Europe and fighting against German and Italy in the desert of North Africa. Limited resources that could help Malaya to fight with Japan. Weak Malaya military, British and local soldiers, unprepared for war and inadequate training and lack of experience.
There were two types of effects. First, economic effects. Economy of Malaya was used for the benefits of the conquerors. Malaya manpower and money was used for the benefit of the Japanese war effort. For foodstuffs and resources were taken for use by the army. There was a self-sufficiency campaign due to food shortage. There was a mass plantation of crops such as tapioca and yam. Thousands of Malaya people died due to starvation. There was a British policy of destruction such as railways, bridges, roads, and rubber and tin industries. Unemployment rose and there was widespread poverty. Business communications affected. Trade with outside world cut down, especially with Penang and Singapore. Second were the social effects. Freedom of movement restricted by introduction of the Peace Living Certificate. Household responsible for the behavior of all members of family and restricted people's movement within Malaya. Education was based on the system in Japan, such as Japanese language, appreciating the culture of Japan, singing the Japanese national song. Defeat against Japan in Malay Kingdom is labeled as one of the most disastrous campaigns in the British military history. The Japanese had a racial policy just as the British did. They treated people according to a race in a way which served their cause only. They treated Indians better and encouraged the idea of Indian independence and campaigned for India to break free from British rule. They regarded the Malays as a colonial people liberated from British imperialistic rule and fostered a limited form of Malay nationalism, which gained them some degree of collaboration from the Malay civil service and intellectuals. As Japan and China had previous history of conflict since 1937, the Japanese regarded the Chinese as enemy aliens and treated them with great harshness during the so-called Suk Ching, which is the purification through suffering. Up to 80,000 Chinese in Malaya were killed. Chinese businesses were expropriated and Chinese schools either closed or burned down.
Something always brings me back to you. It never takes too long. No matter what I say or do, I still feel you here the moment I'm gone. You hold me without a touch. You keep me without a chains. I never want anything so much than to drown in your love, and I feel your rain.
In May 1945, Germans were defeated in Europe so that Britain could concentrate to East Asia states. Allies were ready to invade Japan at this time, and in 1945, 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Penang became the first state in Malaya to be liberated from Japanese rule. Finally, on 15th of August 1945, Japanese surrendered.
Japanese troops who remained in Malaya, Java, Sumatra, and Burma at the end of the war were transferred to Rempang and Galang Islands from October 1945 on to await repatriation to Japan. There were a number of war crimes trials, one of which, held in 1947, found 7 Japanese officers guilty and 2 were executed. It aggravated the independence movement of Malayas.